Hey guys, welcome to my review of this wonderful Porsche 911 992 generation ST. I can't wait to get behind the wheel of it and try my absolute best to bring you lot along for the journey. But before we do that, let's just have a quick look at what the ST is all about. As you can probably see, it's not the cleanest car in the world, and that's because 4 days ago when I picked it up from Porsche GB and Patrick and I drove it through the night and the pissing rain to the middle of France, well, it might have killed a few insects along the way. And aside from a couple of local scratchy car washes, we don't have the detailing equipment to bring it back to factory fresh. But on top of that, Patrick and I both agree that it looks really good dirty. I guarantee you're not going to see too many of these with that much filth on them. The original 911 ST appeared way back in 1969. It was a combination of the 911S and the 911T. It got the punchy engine from the 911S and it got all of the lightweight parts from the 911T. Essentially, it was a race car with number plates. A bit like this. Porsche are making 1,963 of these, and that's not a random number that they've plucked out of the air. 1963 is the year the 911 was born. One of these will set you back £235,000, except this particular press car is over £250,000. And that's because it has a couple of added options. One of those are a £4,000 carbon roll cage, and the other one, you might need to be sitting down for this, is the £15,000 Heritage Design Package. But none of that matters unless you're one of Porsche's best customers. Lightly used examples are online for well over £400,000. Tony, hurry up and start selling Porsches. This is the lightest 992 generation 911 so far, at 1,380 kilos wet, which is really, really impressive, and which is exactly the same weight as a 996 generation GT3. And that's incredible when you stop to think about a couple of things. Firstly, how much bigger a 992 is compared to a 996. Secondly, how much more performance this car has over the 996. Also, safety regulations and all of the red tape that Porsche have to go through to produce such a car in 2024. I think that is massively impressive. And a big part of that weight saving is the use of carbon fiber reinforced plastic. So we have that on the roof, we have it on the bonnet, which is nothing new because you get that in your GT3 and your GT3 Touring. But we also have it on the front wings and on the doors. Under here, we get a naturally aspirated 4-litre flat six lifted straight out of the current GT3 RS, meaning we get 525 horsepower at 8,500 RPM. We also get 465 newton meters of torque at 6,300 RPM. The red line, 9,000 RPM. I'll tell you what, let's pop this open and have a look. Ah, well, that's a bit underwhelming. Looks like the back of a PC. On top of that, this car has a lightweight clutch and a single mass flywheel. Together, they save 10.5 kilos of unsprung mass. But they do make driving it a little bit tricky, and we'll get onto that when we take it out on the road. At this point, I would normally talk about performance figures, but they're totally irrelevant for this particular model. It's not designed for drag races, it's not designed for top speed, it's designed for driving pleasure. But off the record, it's fast. And last but not least, these beautiful wheels. It's a staggered setup, 20-inch on the front axle, 21 on the rear. In terms of fitment, they couldn't be better. How Porsche managed to produce this as a production car is beyond me, because as we know, so many sports cars these days, especially, the fitment is terrible. You need to stick spacers on and drop it. But this, in terms of stance, is spot on. They're forged magnesium, beautiful to look at, lots of little details that you can stick your finger in, and they're clad with Michelin's Pilot Sport Cup 2 tyre, which, as you know, is one of my absolute favourite tyres, especially in conditions like this. But on top of it being a Pilot Sport Cup 2 tyre, it also has an N mark on it. And that means that these tyres were designed to work on Porsche's 992. They spent a lot of time, money, development, setting these up to work perfectly with this car. And you might think, well, why are they going to be any different to the Cup 2s that are designed for my M3 Touring? Well, if you think about it, a 911 is rear-engined and tends to have massive tyres on the rear axle. They handle very differently to a front-engined rear-wheel drive or X-drive BMW M3. And as we know, whether it's a Fiat Panda or a £250,000 Porsche 911, the contact patch and the tyre is arguably the most important part of the car, because it doesn't matter what the brilliant Porsche engineers have done to this car if you can't get that power, performance, driving dynamics down onto the tarmac. And that's what Michelin and Porsche spend a lot of time perfecting with the N-Mark tyre. A little side note, Porsche aren't the only manufacturer to have homologated tyres made by Michelin. If you see a star on the sidewall of a Pilot Sport Cup 2, that means it's designed for a BMW. So it's worth investigating next time you go out and get your Michelins. The sun's out, we're surrounded by beautiful roads. Let's take this out for a drive. Let's slow things down a little bit and start with the practical things. We will get back to that spirited driving a little bit later. The cabin is wonderful. It's a 992, but it's elevated because it's an ST and because we have this £15,000 heritage design package. Driving position is absolutely spot on. I'm sitting nice and low, everything is where it needs to be, ergonomically it's brilliant, and you would think the fact that it's a GT product, it's an ST, we're in a stripped out interior with carbon buckets, it's going to be uncomfortable. Not at all, totally the opposite. I have felt so at home in this cabin and so comfortable. I really think that carbon buckets like these and like the ones that BMW offer on longer journeys are actually beneficial and more comfortable. I know that doesn't sound right and it doesn't make sense, but they really are. And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that they really support you and therefore your body can relax and enjoy the longer journey. Other mentions are this wonderful Porsche steering wheel. It's very similar to the rest of the 992 lineup, or in fact any steering wheel that you get in the majority of Porsches these days. But they have removed the drive mode because there are no drive modes in this car. You can turn the throttle blipper on and off, so you can choose to do heel and toe yourself, or you can let the car do it, and it is tricky in this car with the single mass flywheel, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. And you can open and close the exhaust valves, but otherwise there's nothing else to configure aside from turning stability and traction off, which has been off most of the time in this car because it has so much stability and traction, and because it talks to you all of the time. Just enjoy this little section of road here. This car is honestly just wonderful. Something I'm not sure and convinced about is the carbon roll cage. Although it looks beautiful, and it's definitely something that you tell your mates about, and it's something that I've shown to anyone that's come up to this car to have a look around. There's been quite a few people that have done that, which is no surprise. The reason I don't think that cage is necessary, well, there's two really. Number one, it removes a lot of the practicality in this cabin. You see, 911s, although they're 2+2 in terms of seats most of the time, whether you've got the seats or whether they're removed like they are in this car, that's a really handy place to store soft, large bags. So if you go away for a few days, like Patrick and I have, you've got lots of storage. Except in this car, with the carbon cage especially, it's really difficult, near on impossible, to get anything back there. These carbon buckets don't fold forward, they do slide forward a little bit, so that's your first challenge. And the next challenge is to get bags that are small enough to slot in between the carbon cage, and bags that are soft enough that aren't going to damage or scratch the carbon. And also, how many people are really going to track their ST? Don't get me wrong, if I had millions of pounds, I would own one of these for sure, and I would take it out on track. But the reality is, I would say 90% of ST owners aren't going to take theirs out on track, and therefore once again making the cage kind of redundant. But one thing the ST does have that the GT3 RS doesn't is the wonderful Porsche frunk up there in the bonnet. So there is a usable amount of storage, but it's not brilliant. That is a massive wild boar. Wow. Holy moly. Wow, you don't normally see them in the middle of the day. Anyway, onwards and upwards. Next thing to do is test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. Porsche say it will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.7 seconds. And I know I said I didn't want to talk about performance figures because this car isn't about drag races or acceleration figures, but that's still really impressive. Let's put it into first, hold it on the limiter, 5,000 RPM, and no way am I going to do that. No way am I going to do that. You see, this has got a lightweight clutch, and one instruction that Porsche GEB gave me was, please don't do any hard launches in it, and I'm going to respect that for a couple of reasons. Number one, this isn't my car. Number two, I couldn't afford it if it was my car. Does that make sense? And number three is, I'm out in the middle of France, quite literally in the middle of France, and I need to get home later this evening, and you're not getting far with a car that has a broken clutch. And I have to say, that's probably my biggest negative with the ST, is the fact that you do have to baby the clutch a little bit off the line and think about it. It's always the back of my mind, and I'm sure that would be the case if I own this car as well, because I dread to think what it would cost to replace a clutch. Next thing to talk about is ride and handling, and this looks like a pretty good stretch of road to talk about the handling. Well, just like the GT3 and the GT3 RS, this has the double wishbone suspension setup on the front axle, which we've first seen in the 992 generation, and it's wonderful. It's brilliant in the regular GT3, so no surprise that it feels even better in this car. Whatever Porsche have done with the suspension setup is just amazing. It retains apparently the same spring rates as the regular GT3 and GT3 Touring, except in reality it feels like it's actually softer sprung, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this weighs less than both of those, and they've played around with the adjustments on the damper setting. But whatever they've done, it just feels wonderful. Might also be to do with the fact that this is on those super lightweight forged magnesium wheels, and unsprung mass like the carbon ceramics and the forged magnesium wheels, well, they tend to give you a better ride as well. So it's probably a combination of everything, but either way, this rides better than any modern day GT car I've had the opportunity of getting my hands on. Next thing to talk about is that engine. My goodness, we already know it's a brilliant engine, but paired up to this shorter ratio gearbox, it's unbelievable. I think once again, a bit like the ride, there's a number of things that add up to make that engine and the propulsion of this car so incredible. Firstly, the whole car, it's lighter. Secondly, the engine has a lighter flywheel, single mass flywheel, so it spins up a lot easier. There's less rotating mass. Again, the wheels, the carbon ceramic brakes, but the shorter ratios really help, because this engine is naturally aspirated. That maximum torque figure is right up there at almost 6,500 RPM, which is, in fact, I'll demonstrate. That's maximum torque there at 6,500 RPM. That's most sports cars' red line. And that's where this car's torque comes in. Maximum power, 8,500 RPM. That's there, 8.5, and then you've got the red line at 9. And it gets up there so quickly. And although this is rear-wheel drive only, it finds so much grip. They played around with the limit slip diff, and of course we've got massive 315 section Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 N-Mark tyres, which are designed for this car. They're designed to lay down all of that power with the engine over the top, all that weight's there, and it means even from slower speeds in first gear, I'm not going to use the clutch, don't worry, say 4,000 RPM at 35 kilometers per hour, what's that, about 20, you put your foot down? Oh my god! There's not even a slight hint of slip, nothing. But don't think that you can't have fun in this car, because once you really start loading it up in tighter corners, you can get the tail to come around, and it's all very manageable. a lot of that is thanks to how planted the front end is. So the front end gives you loads of confidence, and you can pivot the car using the front axle. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. You've got a lovely stable anchor on the nose, and that also comes in handy when you make sure there's nothing behind us. There is a car in front of us. I'm going to hit the brakes. Oh my God. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I mean, Porsche's philosophy has always been their cars have to slow down as quick, if not quicker, than they accelerate, I believe. And yeah, this one stops as well as it goes, and it goes as well as anything else I've ever driven. Genuinely, once you're off the line and I've stopped worrying about that clutch and you put your foot down, it's awesome. It is absolutely awesome. One thing I really struggled with for the first couple of days in this car is changing gears smoothly. Now, I'm used to driving a manual car. I own a manual car. I love manual cars, and I know I did have a slight mishap a couple of years ago. But if we brush that aside, I like to think of myself as quite competent with a manual box. But because of that single mass flywheel, the engine and the revs drop away really, really quickly. A couple of minutes ago, we talked about how quickly they rise. They also drop away extremely quickly. So I'll put my foot on the clutch here. I'll give it. Listen to that. Up, down. That quick. Sounds more like a motorbike than a car engine. And that's great when you're really on it and you're flat shifting and you're just going for it. But it's difficult when you're just trying to drive it normally. I'll demonstrate. Let's go down to third and down to second. Now, I'm accelerating through second. Normally, I'll depress the clutch and come off the accelerator, and there's a massive thud there. And the reason there's a massive thud there is because for that half second I came off the accelerator, the revs had dropped all the way to about 1500, and I needed them to be closer to about 3.5. And so in order to get a smooth shift, we're now going to go from third to fourth, you essentially need to keep the throttle input at the same. So not going to move my right foot, not going to change the throttle input. Smooth. It must be something the computer in the engine does, because normally if you do that in a manual, you depress the clutch, the revs would go crazy. So they've obviously had to engineer in something to help you with your shifting, to help me with my shifting. But once you get used to that, it's just brilliant. Really, really brilliant. It's going to be hard for me to go back the other way now. I think when I jump back in my M2 competition, I'm going to be over revving it when I go up the box. I'll just have to adapt to go back the other way. As you can probably tell, I absolutely love this car, and that's no surprise to me, and I'm sure it's no surprise to you lot. It's just brilliant. As with the majority of Porsche products, and especially Porsche GT products, I do tend to fall in love with them, and this, well, I've never fallen so hard for a car. Yes, I absolutely love the 992 GT3 and the GT3 Touring. And when you look at values, lightly used values, because you can't buy either new anymore, well, a lightly used GT3 Touring is going to set you back about 165, 170,000 pounds here in the UK. A lightly used one of these, you're looking at closer to 450,000 pounds, or at least that's what they're asking, that's what they're speculating. So let's see if they actually do trade at those values. But when you look at those two figures, there is no way in a million years that this is worth 2.5 or 3 times more than a GT3 Touring. It just isn't. It's better in pretty much every area, but it's not that much better. It really isn't. For me, well, I'd rather have a GT3 with a wing and a GT3 Touring in my garage than just an ST. But as a one car garage, if you like, as a piece of engineering, as something that you just can't imagine ever being any better, this is it. It's motoring perfection as far as I'm concerned. It does have its small little faults, or let's say negatives, like the lightweight clutch, which I'm sure is better than I'm giving it credit for. And maybe that the wonderful shortened 6-speed manual gearbox is a little bit annoying when you're on the motorway, especially the French toll route, because the speed limit over here is 85, 90 miles an hour. And when you're in 6th gear at 85 or 90 miles an hour in this, you're doing around 4,000 RPM. So you've got the engine making a lot of noise on longer runs. Basically sounds like this. That's not a bad sound, but it does get a little bit tiring after 3 or 4 or 5 hours on the road. But that is literally my only small negatives about this otherwise wonderful, wonderful package. I want to say a massive, massive thanks to Michelin UK for supporting Patrick and I on this trip and making it all possible. Huge thanks goes to Porsche GB, Rory and James, for throwing me the keys to this wonderful car and allowing me to take it to some wonderful roads and some nice weather whilst it's raining back home in the UK. Thanks to my good and very talented friend Patrick for doing the majority of the production on this film. You might have noticed that it's slightly higher than my average YouTube video, and that's all down to Patrick and his skills and all of his gear, so huge thanks to him. And it's also lovely coming away with a good friend on a trip like this, sharing a car like this, the experiences, etc, etc. It's just been absolutely brilliant. And although I'm looking forward to seeing Lou and Peggy when I get home, I really don't want to leave at the same time. And the last thanks goes to all of you for the support and love that you've given me over the years, and you continue to give me today. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. Give us a thumbs up, leave any comments below, and I'll see you at another video very, very soon. Until then, take it easy.